like to thank the Chief Justice for that very enlightening speech, and for now, allow me an opportunity to summarize briefly some of the points the Chief Justice raised. I'm sorry about the heat. This is summer, and this is also the beginning of Lent. The Chief Justice began his speech by talking about, by citing several studies which point to the fact that the Philippines is now known worldwide as a very corrupt country. He said that the perception of corruption in our country is reflected not only in our local studies, some of those connected by the social weather stations, the most recent of which was September 10 to October 10, 2008, where different managers all over the Philippines were interviewed. 402 companies included in the study. And of the 402, 71% said that they had been blatantly asked for bribes in the conduct of their business. The president's rating has plummeted to -32% as of February 20 to 23 of the 2009 polls. The perception of people is reflected worldwide, Chief Justice said. The World Bank study shows that the Philippines edged out Indonesia as the country perceived to be the most corrupt in East Asia. He also said that we have an embarrassing reputation as a human rights violator. The government's response has been one of rhetoric, evasiveness, and finger-pointing. In fact, including the calling of Transparency International as one with a vested interest, having been paid by the opposition. He spoke about loyalties to persons rather than countries having metastasized in our society. He also mentioned, as a piece of good news, the recent move by the International Criminal Court, which is a warning to all of those who are violating human rights in their countries, with the unprecedented arrest of the President of Sudan, al-Bashir, for violation of human rights. This is the first time that this has ever happened, and it sets a precedent, knocking down the impression that there is immunity from suit. Sudan, like the Philippines, has not ratified that particular agreement, but that because of this precedent-setting move, it sends a warning worldwide that human rights violators will be taken seriously. What is significant is there is no more sanctuary and no more immunity for heinous crimes. The Chief Justice also talked about his role as a primus inter pares, his dual role as head of the Supreme Court and head of the whole justice system in our country. He said that sometimes the two major roles are in conflict, and that in administering justice, what he has learned is that justice should weigh heavily against the government and in favor of the people. Finally, the Chief Justice also said that when people ignore the rules of law and belittle due process, they abet authoritarianism. And the rule of law does not tolerate shortcutting and bully tactics, and that the end never justifies the means. Finally, in his epilogue, the Chief Justice reminded us that no matter what the form of leadership, the best form of leadership is still one that leads by example, which then brings us to a long-term and effective way of bringing people out of challenging times like we have. Again, thank you very much, Chief Justice, for your report, for your speech to us this afternoon. We have a few minutes for a couple of questions for the Chief Justice coming for the floor. Are there any questions? Well, if the Chief Justice doesn't have any questions from the floor, I have one. Chief Justice, you talked about corruption being very almost endemic in our society. And my question to you, Chief Justice, is, in your career as a jurist and as a member of the highest court, have you ever had any instance where somebody talked to you about the possibility of accepting a bribe?
Not to me personally. I suppose that first, I didn't want to talk about problems at the court with anyone. I had to have a fortress-like attitude about cases pending in the court. But as I said, I could not avoid also socializing and meeting people. How to balance this fortress-like requirement of a jurist with people's skills is really a great balancing act. But no, there have been no propositions directly to me to corrupt me.
Okay, Chief Justice, one of the questions from the floor is, there is perceived public perception that the Supreme Court justices are corrupt and cases can be bought. Your comments on this, please, Chief Justice.
Well, perceptions are really difficult, no? The Supreme Court works in the difficulty of being opaque many times. There is a need, of course, to be transparent, and that's, again, a problem. To be opaque, to make confidential certain procedures in the court, like the internal deliberations of the court, are confidential. I can't talk of the internal deliberations of the court, even now that I have retired, because that is sacred among us. At the same time, people want to know, how did the Supreme Court arrive at this or that decision? And you may ask, you were a leader, how did you show by example how to be transparent? Well, I have 11 books that explain my incumbency in the Supreme Court. That's the way by which I could be transparent.
Thank you, Chief Justice. One more question for you. You are remembered for your controversial role in 2001 when you installed then Vice President Gloria Arroyo after the downfall of ERA. Will you agree to do this again?
That's a loaded question, and it requires a lengthy answer. The answer, of course, is, times dictate, the circumstances dictate actions. There is no hard and fast rule when emergencies abound. But I did not install her. It was the Supreme Court. Remember, I took no part, together with Chief Justice Davide, in that decision, saying that GMA is the legitimate permanent president of the Philippines.
Okay. And the last question, were you able to eliminate or lessen corruption during your term as Chief Justice?
I should like to think so. If you remember, Chief Justice Davide was hounded by an impeachment complaint, allegedly because he was not transparent in the handling of the Judiciary Development Fund, or JDF. On my first day as Chief Justice, I created a committee composed of the heads of all the employees' organizations in the judiciary, from the lowest courts, the lowest employees group, to the Supreme Court Employees Association. And I told them, look over all our records and tell me whether there is any problem. That ended the problem, because they asked me and I asked them to advise me on what the problem was by looking at the records of the court. In that sense, we were transparent, and the employees who were complaining about lack of transparency in the disposition of that judiciary fund were satisfied.
Okay, thank you very much. I do regret very much that we don't have enough time for this whole bunch of questions. But with due respect to those who have taken the time to do this, may I hand this over to you, Chief Justice, so you can look them over and probably address them in your next book, on your 12th book. On that note, ladies and gentlemen, we would like to take a 10-minute break. A 5-minute break. We will resume the session on the second leadership conference at 3:30 exactly. Thank you very much.